At the beginning of the film, we're introduced to an old man named Paul Edgecombe, living in a nursing home. He's sharp and gets around on his own just fine. After washing up, he asks for nothing but 2 pieces of toast for breakfast to take with him. An orderly figures out that Paul is planning to sneak off for a walk in the woods, even though it's not allowed. He's willing to look the other way and just asks Paul to be careful. Paul heads out, grabs his jacket, and slips away. He makes his way to an abandoned cabin in the woods. That evening he returns, and back at the nursing home, everyone's watching an old movie on TV, Top Hat. Watching the romantic scenes, Paul gets emotional and starts to cry. His old friend Elaine is there to comfort him. The next morning, during a rainstorm, the 2 old folks talk about how hard memories can hit you out of nowhere. Paul decides to open up about something he's never told anyone before. 60 years ago, Paul worked at a prison during the Great Depression. Jobs were scarce, and he held on to his for dear life. He was the supervisor on death row, the last mile. They called it the Green Mile, after the color of the floor tiles.
We had the electric chair, old Sparky, we called it.
The most memorable year was 1935. That was the year Paul came down with a urinary infection that made it impossible to forget, and also the year 2 little girls were murdered. We're taken back to the past. We see a young Paul standing in the bathroom, wincing in pain. His colleagues Brutal and Dean tell him to take the day off and see a doctor, but he refuses. Today he has a new inmate coming in. Soon, a vehicle pulls up to the entrance. Newcomer Percy and the more experienced Harry escort a massive man out from inside. Nearly 7-foot Brutal looks like a little kid standing next to him, to say nothing of the smug, pint-sized Percy, whose attitude gets under everyone else's skin. Paul greets the barefoot giant and asks whether he's planning to cause any trouble. The man could easily overpower the guards, but instead, his face shows nothing but anxiety, and even fear. The black prisoner quietly calls Paul boss and steps into his cell. Paul orders Percy to step out. Percy pushes back, and someone has to raise their voice at him. The whole embarrassing scene is noticed by an inmate named Dell. He laughs right in the guard's face, so Percy breaks his fingers with his baton. Once Percy finally clears out, Paul asks for John's handcuffs to be removed. Paul figures the big man is intellectually disabled. Coffee can only write his own name.
Yes, sir, boss. Like to drink, only not spelled the same.
The man quietly asks whether they turn the lights off after lights out. He says he's afraid of the dark. Lucky for him, the lights in the hallway burn all night long. He reaches out to shake Paul's hand. The guards tense up. John could crush their boss without thinking. But Paul can see there's nothing to be afraid of. At the end, Coffee says something strange, that he wanted to make it right, but couldn't. Paul asks for the new prisoner's file. As Paul reads through it, we're shown a flashback. A house where 2 little girls went missing. When their father bursts inside, he finds blood on the floor. He and his son grab their rifles and run out to search. He finds our giant sitting against a log, holding the bodies of the 2 little girls. The father starts beating him, but is pulled away. Back in the present, prison warden Hal Moores walks up to Paul. Paul asks his old friend about his wife. Melinda has been suffering from terrible headaches. On the work front, they've got an upcoming execution to organize, a death row inmate named Bitterbuck. Paul also needs to watch his step around Percy. The man is related to the governor, and there's no easy way to fire him. That said, the little weasel has his eye on a position at a psychiatric hospital. He clearly has an unhealthy fascination with psychopaths. Paul realizes Percy could have transferred long ago, but has been waiting for something. Most likely he wants to watch an execution up close. If the guy agrees to leave quietly after that, everyone is willing to give him a proper send-off. At home, Paul lies awake at night. He can't wrap his head around how God could have allowed John Coffey's terrible crime. His wife wants to help him sleep and invites him to bed. Paul turns her down, blaming the infection. The next day, a mouse is spotted in the cell block. It walks right out into the middle of the hallway, not the least bit scared of the men around it. Brutal tosses it some food, and the little critter scurries off into the padded isolation cell used for violent inmates. The room doubles as a storage space and is packed floor to ceiling with junk. The guards tear the whole place apart, but the mouse is nowhere to be found. Later, it comes back like nothing happened, and Percy spots it. He goes into a rage and tries to stomp it. The mouse dives back into the storage room. The commotion brings the others running in to calm him down. They quietly decide to let him keep digging through the storage room, just to mess with him. Percy wastes a ton of time hauling stuff around and comes up empty. Then he gets chewed out for all the noise he made. Paul explains that the guard's job is to keep things calm because their inmates are mentally unstable people. Under stress, they can snap and hurt themselves or others. Percy's response is to hurl insults at the inmates and his fellow officers. Brutal grabs him by the throat, and Paul has to pull his friend off. Percy could use his connections to get people fired, but Paul has had it up to here with his antics. Edgecombe makes it clear they're willing to lose their jobs over it. If Percy steps out of line again, he's going to get the beating of his life regardless. Soon Bitterbuck heads off for a last visit with his wife and daughter. While the guards run through a rehearsal of the execution, another inmate plays the role of the condemned. While he's being strapped into the electric chair, the man cracks dirty joke after dirty joke. The guards can barely hold it together. Dark humor is the only thing keeping them sane. Paul, as the man in charge, scolds his crew. When it's the real thing, there'll be no smiling. Percy watches the whole rehearsal with great interest from the side. Before putting the electrode cap on the condemned man's head, a wet sponge has to be placed on top. It makes death come faster and more humanely. That evening, Bitterbuck's head is shaved for better conductivity. Paul sits down with the inmate for one last conversation. The man believes that if a person is truly sorry for what he's done, after death he'll travel back to the happiest moment of his life. For Bitterbuck, that was a trip to the mountains with his wife. In the firelight that evening, the flames lit up her beautiful body. They were only 18, and they talked until sunrise. Paul tells him he believes that too. Maybe that's what heaven is.
Had me a young wife when I was 18. Spent our first summer in the mountains. Made love every night.
Bitterbuck is still terrified of the execution, and Paul does his best to calm him down. The man is strapped into the chair in front of witnesses in the viewing room. Brutal orders the switch to be thrown. Horrible screams of pain fill the room. The doctor examines the body, but Bitterbuck's heart is still beating. A second jolt passes in the dead silence. After the execution, Percy makes his ignorance known again.
Adios, Chief. Drop us a card from hell. Let's know if it's hot enough.
Brutal shoves the bastard aside and wheels out the body. Then Paul sits down with Percy to discuss his transfer away from the Green Mile. Percy sets his terms. He doesn't just want to watch the next execution. He wants to run it. Paul reluctantly agrees. The next day the mouse crawls out of hiding again. This time it climbs up into Dell's cell, and Dell lets it sit on his shoulder. The man is completely taken with his new pet, which he names Mr. Jingles. The clever little critter even responds to commands, rolling a thread spool right back to him. Even Percy seems charmed and offers to set the mouse up with a cigar box as a little home. Later, Hal calls Paul into his office and tells him a new inmate is on his way. William Wharton, known as Wild Bill, has a long rap sheet. He'll be executed for the murder of 3 people, including a pregnant woman. The warden suddenly loses his composure and can't hold back his grief. His wife has been diagnosed with a massive brain tumor. Hal has no idea how to tell Melinda she won't survive. That night, Paul is back to suffering with the pain in his groin. He'll finally go see a doctor, but first he has to deal with Wharton's arrival. In the morning, Dean, Harry, and Percy go pick up the inmate from the psychiatric hospital. Between the medication, the man is a complete zombie. They bring him to the mile just as Paul is burning up with fever. Coffee asks his boss to come over, but the phone rings at that exact moment. The second Wharton steps inside the building, he drops the act. He clocks Percy, then wraps his chains around Dean's neck. Paul tries to help, but takes a shot to the groin and goes down in pain. Old Harry can't handle the young maniac either. The cowardly Percy freezes up completely. Brutal saves the day by knocking Wharton out cold. Paul sends his beaten-up colleagues to get medical attention, and the rest to fill out their reports. He stays behind to watch the mile himself, even though he can barely stand from the pain. Coffee calls him over again, but he answers him.
This is not a good time. John Coffey, not a good time at all.
Pulling himself together, Paul steps closer. In one swift move, John slams him against the bars. Dell shouts for help, and Coffey grabs Paul by the groin. The light in the cell blazes up bright and bursts. The giant lets go of Paul and starts coughing hard. A strange cloud of ash pours from his mouth and dissolves into the air.
I just took it back, so awful tired, that boss.
John drops onto his bunk and falls asleep. Paul walks to the bathroom and realizes the pain is completely gone. He feels like a new man. He and his wife spend the whole evening and night reliving their younger years, not getting out of bed. In the morning, Paul takes the day off. He tries to dig up some background on John Coffey from the lawyer who defended him in court, but nothing is known about the giant's past. It's like he fell out of the sky. Edgecombe doesn't believe Coffey is capable of brutality, but the lawyer has no doubt about his guilt. He compares John to a stray dog his family once took in. The dog was calm and gentle, right up until it attacked his son for no reason at all. The boy lost an eye. The next day, Paul brings John a piece of cornbread his wife baked.
Was your missus pleased?
Several times.
Coffey shares some with Dell and Mr. Jingles. Wharton asks for a piece too, but nobody pays him any mind. He calls the big man a slur and spits in Paul's face. Later, he defecates on the floor. The guards subdue him with a fire hose and throw him in the isolation cell. He promises to behave, but instead he buys a cream puff from a janitor and spits it in Brutal's face. He goes straight back into isolation. Dell's execution is coming up, and he has no family to speak of. Instead, the prison staff takes on the roles of big-time visitors who've heard about the circus mouse and want to see a performance. Meanwhile, Paul runs Percy through a rehearsal of the ceremony. Everything goes smoothly. Afterward, Percy sees Dell happily heading back to his cell. It almost looks like the two of them are about to bury the hatchet. But then Percy suddenly lunges to scare him. Dell falls and hits his head. Percy laughs and says he was just joking around. He gets distracted, and Wharton reaches through the bars and grabs him. Wharton gropes him and makes threats, but quickly lets go.
I let him go. I was just playing. I let him go. I've never heard a hair on his pretty little head.
Wharton compares Percy to a little girl, and Dell gets a kick out of the whole thing. Percy pissed himself from fright. Burning with shame, he demands that everyone keep what happened between them. Paul tells him what happens on the mile stays on the mile. Only Dell keeps twisting the knife. The day of the execution arrives, and Dell is worried about what will happen to Mr. Jingles. Paul says he'll take the mouse home, but Dell says Mr. Jingles would be scared living next to a big forest. People come there like it's a circus. Dell believes in the place and is overjoyed. It's the perfect home for Mr. Jingles. Then the spool drops, and the mouse chases it out into the hallway. To the horror of everyone watching, Percy stomps the little creature flat with his boot and walks away. Dell cries out in grief, and Coffey reaches his hand through the bars, motioning for Paul to hurry. Paul brings him the mouse's body, and the giant presses his lips to it. Light floods everything around them, and a very much alive Mr. Jingles goes running back to Dell. Coffey breathes out another cloud of ash. The guards can't believe what they just saw. Paul and Brutal walk over to Percy.
Just fine. You know better at mouse killing than you ought at anything else around here.
Percy has already bolted to another room, stunned that the mouse is still alive. He starts yelling at his co-workers, convinced they set him up to look like a fool. Brutal grabs the little weasel again, and Paul lays down an ultimatum. Percy disappears right after Dell's execution, or the guards will beat him senseless and then go on the record, under oath, about every rotten thing he's done, and every moment he's shown his true cowardly colors. He and Paul shake on it. That evening, Dell is walked to his execution. He places Mr. Jingles on the warden's shoulder and asks him to take care of the mouse. Since Jingles can't stay there during the ceremony, Coffey takes him for the time being.
Au revoir, mon ami. Je t'aime, mon petit.
The prisoner is led out in front of the witnesses, and he's deeply disappointed to see Percy's smirk. In his last words, Dell asks forgiveness for his sins. He pleads with Paul not to forget about the mouse. Then Percy pulls something unforgivable. Percy is then supposed to wet the sponge, but he only pretends to dip it in the bucket. Paul realizes too late what's happening, and Percy gives the order to throw the switch. Dell writhes in agony as a horrible smell fills the room. At the same time, John Coffey convulses in his cell, trying to share in Dell's suffering. Wharton, meanwhile, is jumping for joy. He's loving every second of the chaos. Paul figures the most merciful thing is to leave the current on and wait for the man to die. Unfortunately, he's wrong. Dell's agony drags on, and his body catches fire. The witnesses panic and rush for the exits. Paul notices Percy looking away and forces him to face what he's done. When the screaming finally stops, Brutal orders Percy to put Dell out with a fire extinguisher. Afterward, Percy has the nerve to claim he didn't know about the sponge. Brutal snaps and punches him in the face. Hal comes down to chew Paul out over the whole disaster. Edgecombe quickly realizes their top priority is getting rid of Percy as fast as possible, so he covers for him. That way their deal stays intact. Then Paul goes to John. The giant is sobbing. He felt every bit of Dell's pain, but now it's over. Mr. Jingles, frightened out of his mind, has run back into the storage room. John is utterly exhausted and lies down to sleep. On the weekend, Paul and his wife go to visit Hal and Melinda. The woman is holding up reasonably well. Hal mentions that sometimes she loses herself and starts screaming obscenities he'd never even heard before. The next day, Paul invites his coworkers over for lunch and tells them the story of his miraculous recovery. He proposes helping Hal's wife by secretly breaking John Coffey out of prison for one night. Everyone is stunned by the idea. If they get caught, they're going straight to prison. On top of that, John is a convicted murderer who could kill them or other innocent people. This is the first time Paul says out loud that he believes Coffey is innocent. God would not have given a gift like that to a killer and a rapist. In the end, he manages to bring his friends around. On the chosen night, Wharton is given a horse-sized dose of sleeping medication and goes out cold. Then everyone thoroughly enjoys strapping Percy into a straitjacket, stuffing a gag in his mouth, and throwing him in the isolation cell. Paul tells him it's payback for Dell, and the kid doesn't suspect a thing. Dean, being the youngest, stays behind on the mile. He's got little kids at home and can't afford to get caught red-handed. If anything goes wrong, he'll say Coffey is the one in isolation and the others stepped out on business. John has already figured out what's going on and is thrilled to be going outside. But as they're bringing him out of his cell, that lunatic grabs the man by the arm. Wharton goes limp again. Outside, John is beside himself with joy at the sight of the night sky. He crouches down, pulls up some grass, and breathes in its smell, motioning for the others to do the same. The four of them climb into a truck and drive to Hal's place. Somehow, the giant already knows they're going to help a lady he's never met. When they arrive, the warden steps out to meet them with a shotgun. He thinks it's a riot or a breakout attempt. Paul tries to explain, and John walks forward without a trace of fear. He can already sense where he's needed. Hal is floored, but he lets his friends talk him into it. Coffey sits down on Melinda's bed. She notices his body is covered in scars. Someone had beaten him severely, but the man has no memory of his childhood. The giant says his name and leans in close to the woman's face. He touches her lips, and the light bulbs burn brighter. Every clock in the house stops, and the whole place shakes like an earthquake. John takes Melinda's illness into himself and starts to suffocate. But this time, he doesn't let it out. He refuses help, and the sick woman comes to. She doesn't remember the recent events and feels perfectly healthy. They're introduced to John as if for the first time. She tells him she dreamed they met in the darkness. She gives Coffey a pendant with the image of St. Christopher, also a giant who spent his life helping others at the cost of his own. The guards drag an exhausted and ailing John back to the truck. Brutal figures he held the tumor inside on purpose, to die before the execution. They make it back safely and put Coffey to bed in his cell. Then they let Percy out, and he hasn't learned a single thing, only gotten nastier. On his way out, John grabs him by the throat and pulls him against the bars. While Percy gasps desperately for air, Coffey breathes a massive cloud of gray ash into him. The guards check Percy over. He's shaken but looks physically fine. With completely empty eyes, the man walks down the hallway. Then he suddenly turns toward Wild Bill, draws his revolver, and puts 6 bullets into the man, killing him. Percy collapses to the floor, and the ash pours from his mouth. Paul is the first to pull himself together and goes to John. The giant explains that he punished the wicked. When Wild Bill grabbed his arm, John saw every single one of his crimes. Now he holds out his hand to show his boss. They touch, and Paul sees the last day of the murdered sisters' lives. His body shakes with pain, and the light bulbs all around him shatter. Wharton had been helping the girl's father do repairs on the house, and had sat down to eat with the family. That night, he came for the sisters and led them into the woods. He threatened that if one of them screamed, he would kill the other. John feels pain and suffering from all over the world. It happens everywhere, every single day, and it torments him without end. Later, Hal and the police arrive on scene. Percy doesn't respond to anyone and stares at nothing. The warden asks Paul whether what happened at his home is connected to Bill's murder. Paul understands he's better off lying. In the end, Percy does get transferred to the psychiatric hospital, but as a patient. Now, Paul is facing an impossible dilemma. John Coffey is a holy man, the last person on earth who deserves the electric chair. Edgecombe has done a lot of things in his life, but if he doesn't stop this execution, he's going straight to hell. He opens up to his wife, and she suggests asking John himself what he wants. Paul takes her advice. There are 2 days left until John's execution. The gentle giant can feel Paul's anguish and asks him not to worry. He has no desire to go free.
Tired of being on the road, lonely as a sparrow in the rain. I'm tired of never having me a buddy to be with.
The man is worn out from wandering the world alone, feeling everyone's pain every single day. Death will be a relief. For his last wish, he asks for some of that cornbread again, and also, for the very first time in his life, to watch a movie. The guards are happy to make it happen. John watches Top Hat in pure wonder, the very same film that moved Paul to tears back at the nursing home. John says the dancers look like angels. Finally, the day of the execution arrives. Paul has to take back the pendant Melinda gave him, but promises to return it when it's over. Coffey smiles. He tells Paul about a dream he had, about Mouseville, where Mr. Jingles was entertaining the two sisters, alive and happy. After that, he's led into the hall, where John goes still. He can feel the intense hatred coming from the people in the room, especially the girl's parents. They demand the killer be executed twice, so he suffers as much as possible. Brutal quietly advises him to focus on the guards, who have deep sympathy for John. Dean is crying openly as he straps the gentleman into the chair. Paul holds his face like stone with everything he has. He reads the sentence aloud, and a black hood is placed over John's head. John begs them not to cover his eyes. "Elaine, don't put me in the dark. I'm afraid of the dark." Paul honors the request and soaks the sponge thoroughly. Everyone waits for the warden to give the final order. He can't get a single word out. Instead, he walks over and shakes John's hand. Words burn through his mind and brand themselves on his heart. They helped him kill himself. It's all so wrong and so terrible. Paul gives the order. The execution goes smoothly, and John dies without a sound. Tears stream down the men's faces. Afterward, Paul places the pendant on the giant's lifeless chest. Back in the present, the old man brings his story to a close. That was his last execution. He and Brutal later transferred to a juvenile detention facility, hoping to help troubled teenagers turn their lives around. Elaine clearly doesn't quite believe everything her friend has told her. On top of all that, Paul has to be far older than he looks. In answer, Paul takes her along on a walk. They make their way to the cabin in the woods. Inside, in a cigar box, lives Paul's old friend.
Monsieur et Madame, bienvenue au Cirque de Mousy.
Elaine is stunned to find Mr. Jingles still rolling his little spool around. After John's execution, the mouse had come back to Paul, and Paul had taken him in. Through his miraculous touch, John had passed a piece of his power to both Paul and the little creature. Paul is now 108 years old. He has outlived everyone he ever loved, and he believes that is his punishment for taking part in the execution of a true miracle of God.